Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod. Ammar, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. A week removed from the next Grand Prix in Spain. We're going to find out a lot of things, aren't we?
Yes, we are. The Barcelona wind tunnel, as it's been dubbed. Um, Today, though, I thought we could have a little chat about Kimi Antonelli and some brand spanking new super license rules that have just come out. And what I wanted to talk about was, first of all, why that's happened, what it kind of means. And I'm sure you have some thoughts about that, given how it affects certain American drivers. But also just to feed that back into what we were talking about the other day with regard to Lewis, some of the comments he made, and the question about sabotage, which we kind of dismissed a little bit in our last video. Yes, indeed. So just as a kicker off, here's what the new super license rules look like. Um, so Article 13.1.2 of Appendix L reads, at the sole discretion of the FIA, a driver judged to have recently and consistently demonstrated outstanding ability and maturity in single-seater Formula Car competition may be granted a super license at the age of 17 years old. Why is that important? Well, Kimi Antonelli doesn't turn 18 until the Italian Grand Prix this year. And currently, the FIA super license rules mean that unless you're 18, you cannot get a super license. And we know that that's essentially the Max Verstappen rule, isn't it? He came in when he was 17, and the FIA since then have been trying to stop that from happening again. But this seems to allow him to have involvement in free practice sessions and potentially even have a race seat. Where has that come from? Well, we already know that there had been some rumours of Williams trying to make this happen so that they could potentially get Kimi into a seat this year in place of Logan Sargent. But Mercedes probably had an incentive as well to try and get him into some free practice sessions before they put him into a race seat, perhaps next year. What do you think?
I think it's fantastic. I think on its own, I mean, this has come up in the past too, right, with Max. And a couple of years ago, I think didn't we sort of deal with this with Colton Herta, I think, or someone else. I can't if I have Colton, right? Yeah. And if for some reason it didn't happen, then I have to admit I'm not very well aware of the intricacies of the rule and sort of the spirit behind it. But I think we live in a day and age now where folks are coming into the sport pretty young, I should say, and this is happening across sport, literally everywhere else. So why not, right? It makes all the sense in the world. I don't think that by itself is a storyline. I think what is fascinating is sort of the outcome of this, right? Like, and trying to deal with all the machinations of what that possibly means for Mercedes, for Williams. I want to add Carlos Sainz in the mix there too, because he is in negotiations with them, right? However true those rumors are or not. So I'm fascinated by sort of the fallout, if you will, of this particular ruling.
Well, I think both Williams and Mercedes have kind of denied all knowledge and said it has nothing to do with them. I mean, the Colton Herta thing is important, I think, because it's just another kind of nail in that corkboard that the FIA absolutely seem to prioritize European drivers over American drivers, right? That driving in IndyCar doesn't seem to give you the same number of points, or it doesn't give you the same number of points towards your super license that driving in single seaters in Europe does. So I think that's a conversation that we probably need to have, but we might park it for another time. But there is some imbalance there. But I do want to talk a little bit about Kimi, because this does seem to be directed towards him. Who the heck is Kimi Antonelli? I don't think we've really talked about him at all on this show. But why is there such a big buzz about him? Kimi is the son of Marco Antonelli, who's a pretty successful sports car driver. The Kimi in his name does relate to the Kimi that we all know, because Dad's a big fan. But he came out of karts and was a world karting champion in his second year in that
Oof.
category, which is pretty impressive. There's not many drivers that are going to do that. And then that followed up in 2022 and 2023 with not one, not two, but four Formula 4 titles. The junior categories are a little bit confusing in terms of how they are organized, but the F4 titles, the F4 championships, sorry, work from a national and regional point of view. So you get national championships, which, as the name suggests, are linked to a particular country, and then you get regional championships, which are an amalgam of different countries together, right? So Kimi in 2022 was a champion in both Italian F4 and German F4 in the same season, right? And then in 2023 graduated and did some regional F4 instead. So he was a rookie champion in both the Middle East and European Formula Regional Championships. That's 4 titles in 2 seasons, right? And that earned him a promotion, bypassing F3 and straight into F2. Now, you could argue that he struggled a little bit in F2. My rule about drivers in F2 is, look, if you're a rookie champion in F2, for me, that's an automatic. You're going to be awesome, right? You're going to do some big things, because people that have drivers that have won F2 in their rookie season classically have done really well in F1. Like, just look at the roll call. You've got Nico Rosberg, who won GP2 the first time of asking, although it was the first season GP2 was running that year. Lewis is another one. Charles Leclerc is another one. George Russell is another one. Oscar Piastri is another one. All of these guys are drivers that we know are going to do well and have been doing well in Formula One. But Kimi, on the face of it, isn't doing brilliantly. He's driving for a Prima team at the moment that are struggling a little bit, though, with the new car, and he is outperforming his teammate, who is Ollie Behrman, and we saw how well he performed when he turned up for his cameo race in Jeddah. So you can understand a little bit sort of why there's a big buzz around him.
I'm also kind of wondering, because everything we heard about Kimi Antonelli came in the aftermath of the Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes and going to Ferrari news, right? So you mentioned earlier that there's sort of a perceived bias, or maybe an actual bias, against American drivers that come up through other series such as IndyCar and Colton Herta, right? But do you think that Kimi Antonelli gets a super license had Lewis Hamilton stayed on at Mercedes? Does that still happen?
Yeah, I think they've been pretty keen, and look, I think both things feed into each other. Like, why did Lewis move to Ferrari? He moved to Ferrari because he wasn't being given the deal that he wanted, which was a 2-year deal, right? At least. And why was he not being given a 2-year deal? Well, Toto Wolff and Mercedes were already planning to succession, weren't they? And they didn't want to be locked into having a 41-year-old driver on their books and then potentially lose Kimi Antonelli. So I don't think you can separate those two things out, because I think one followed the other.
So if that's the case, then why is Toto, or why has he been? And I think he hasn't stopped doing this. Maybe he's not doing it publicly anymore. Why has he been going after Max? Like, that kind of makes no sense to me, right? Because when you think about where the makeup of the Mercedes team will be, there will be 3 drivers for 2 seats potentially. What if Max does in fact decide to join Mercedes?
I think he'd take Max over Kimi. Like, they put it that way, because like with Max, it's not the same thing. It's not a case of I'm missing the next big thing, because you've got the big thing in front of you, right? Like, you're always going to take absolute performance, and the reason he's chasing him, I think, is because there's been an opportunity to do so, right? Whatever sort of internal politics are at play at Red Bull, Max has been involved in them, and he's flamed that fire as well.
So I find that fascinating, right? Because again, it seems like having Max and Kimi on the same team would spell disaster at some point, sooner or later. And yet, Toto has placed a lot of confidence, his own sort of personal stake in George Russell as well. So I find all of that interesting. But to get back to your point, I think this is also a very fascinating thing for Carlos, right? Because he wants essentially what Lewis Hamilton couldn't get, right? Like, which is the long-term deal too. And everywhere he's getting a long-term deal is not with the top teams. It is with, the up-and-comers or teams with potential, such that might be the case. And I think this is really fascinating. I wonder how he's receiving all this news, right? Because if there is, in fact, a switch to happen at Williams coming after the summer break, I wonder what kind of message that sends to Carlos as well. I have no answers. I just have more questions than anything else.
Well, I can tell you because Toto had this to say in Canada. So he says, I think, first of all, Carlos deserves a top seat. He's done a fantastic job. But for us, we've embarked on a route now to say, you know what? We want to reinvent ourselves a little bit going forward. And Kimi Antonelli definitely plays a part in that. So he's out and out said, we haven't got a seat for Carlos. And the reason that we don't have a seat for Carlos is because we want Kimi. And I want to talk about what that means, because look, this is a bit of a pivot away from Kimi and a 17-year-old getting a super license and him driving for Mercedes. But I think it does go back to what we were talking about in terms of Lewis and the conversation that we had the other day. Now, look, we've done a series of videos about Lewis and his whether he's in his prime or not, and why his qualifying pace is suffering against George Russell, and then the last video where we talked about whether or not we thought Mercedes was sabotaging Lewis. And if you haven't watched that, spoiler, we don't think he's being sabotaged by Mercedes. But that did draw a lot of comments from some of our viewers, some of the people that we value and who watch our channel. And I don't want to dismiss any of that, but I do want to talk about one of the things that you said. So you had said in our last video that perhaps Lewis is actually fanning the flames a little bit. Like he's causing some of the conspiracy theorists and the anger against Mercedes by saying some of the things that he's saying. And just to be really precise, after Monaco, he talked about the fact that he becomes slower. He loses, he says, 2/10 between free practice and qualifying, whereas George seems to get quicker. And he doesn't understand why, specifically saying that perhaps Mercedes are turning down his engine, or I don't know what. And then mentioning again the tire blanket problem that happened in Montreal, that he says has happened a couple of times, where his tires are coming out a couple of degrees colder than they should do from the tire blankets. And is there something going on there? And I want to talk about how the Kimi Antonelli thing, how Toto's comments, how the super license rules, how all of that might feed back into how Lewis might be feeling right now. Because I think that's the real question here is Lewis Hamilton feeling a bit of paranoia, and is he justified in feeling that paranoia?
I think there are many areas where we can kind of look at that with Lewis, not in particularly because of the team he's leaving, but the team he's joining to. I don't think that is going to be a walk in a park by any stretch of the imagination, no matter what Ferrari say right now, because their guy is Leclerc and they can say everything they want for Hamilton, but he is not going to be the number one guy there. But to answer your question, I think, and I've maintained this with you, even when I've questioned his motivation, not in the purest sense of does he want to compete, but this is kind of what I meant, in that now this season is all about a messy divorce. That's what this is. You're seeing the fallout from just that. Toto Wolff, Lewis Hamilton, remember them at the peak of 2021 and the rivalry they had with Max and Christian and Red Bull. These guys are far more sophisticated, far more excellent in placing words and sentences. And to me, nothing they say is out of place. Everything has a certain intent, right?
Mm.
And I think this has been going back and forth, by the way. Even Toto Wolff has fanned the flames on this, right? Because remember, again, in Australia and Melbourne, your home race, he talked about every session being a test session, not every practice session, literally every session. What happens that weekend? Lewis starts tweaking things around, gets it wrong. Then he's sort of been thrown under the bus, and now he's sort of coming back with this. And so there's going to be more and more of this throughout the year, because these are alpha males, alpha personalities that are, let's just call it what it is. They are insecure to a certain extent, because that is the nature of the sport. It requires you to be that way. So I just want to quickly finish. I'm not in any way blasting Lewis Hamilton or Toto Wolff. I just think this is the nature of where we're at with these things.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I understand where those comments are coming from. Just to your point about a messy divorce, it doesn't have to be this way, because look, if the car was more competitive and Lewis was on top in that, I don't think this would be happening. Look at what happened to Fernando
it's not just that,
in 2000 and look at what happened to Fernando in 2006, right? He announced at the beginning of 2006 that he was leaving Renault to go to McLaren the next season, and Renault didn't like suddenly back off him, but you know, there weren't underhand tactics there or anything that Fernando thought might be a reason that the team weren't behind him, and he went on and won a championship that season before going to McLaren.
Yeah, but I would argue, Shez, that this is a different thing, right? I don't quite compare the two situations the same. In part because think about the emotional bond that the two of them have had, right? We have seen this chronicled throughout their dominant run, throughout Drive to Survive, throughout everything that's been put out in print, and even all kinds of video content that's been out there. Toto Wolff did not offer Lewis the long-term contract he wanted. Lewis didn't like it. Lewis decided to pull the plug earlier on him and join Ferrari ahead of schedule. He didn't like it. There is a lot of hurt feelings. There's a lot of broken china in that particular room. And I think that's the fallout that you're seeing here. It's not necessarily whether the car is competitive or not. It's just that.
I think that does have something to do with it. But
of course it does, but I don't think it's the overriding thing.
Yeah, and I definitely don't know why we're arguing, because I agree with you. The reasons that he's having that we're hearing some of the comments from both sides because of this, because he's not going to be in a Mercedes next year, and he has been for a long time. But to your specific point, right, about is it a real thing? Is it that Mercedes are actually sabotaging Lewis? We both agree that that's not what's going on. But you said Lewis is fanning those flames, like as if it's his fault that his fan base are coming after Mercedes and calling and pulling the sabotage card, and that's the bit that I just want to. That's the thread that I want to pull on, because I don't disagree with you, right? I don't disagree that his comments are drawing people in and getting them to try and put two and two together and getting five. Like, I understand that sentiment, but I also want to try and understand why Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, winner of 103 Grand Prix, the most of anyone, the gainer of 104 poles, the most of anyone. Why would he say that now? Right?
Because because the pain of losing is far greater than the joy of winning. And having lost something recently and not be able to gain that back.
But he's had a lot of seasons. He's had 2 seasons prior to this where he hasn't said anything like this. But why has that happened now? And I think you need to understand where this has come from, right? You need to understand all of the things that have piled onto him since, and I'm going to say it, because of Abu Dhabi 2021, right? That was a whatever you think about that, whatever you think about how that played out and who deserved what and blah, blah, blah. For Lewis, we know that he thought about walking away, but he came back because he thought he would have a chance of winning another championship and redressing that injustice and getting his 8th title. That's the mentality that he came into 2022 with, right? But you have to look at how all of that has played out since. So Abu Dhabi 2021, the FIA, in his eyes, in my eyes, in a lot of people's eyes, screwed him over. And his team didn't go all the way and fight that. We understand why that happened. They got pressure from the FIA. He was also one of the drivers, from what we understand, of not pushing that forward. But why was he not? Because ostensibly he thought he was going to get a better car in 2022. Turns up in 2022, he has a bullish attitude. He says, if you thought I was good last year, just wait till you see me this year. And then he's driving a dog of a car in 2022 and 2023. He doesn't have the tools to fight against Max, who's running away with the championship in both those seasons. And on top of that, he no longer has the driver sitting in the team opposite him, who's kind of, he knows he can beat. Right now, he's got George Russell, because now's the time, according to Mercedes, to promote him. So he's got a car that isn't running. He's got a really competitive teammate. And then when it comes to renewal time, his boss says, "Nah, look, we're not gonna renew you. We're gonna give you a 1-year deal, possibly with an option for another year. But look, essentially, this is what it is." And the reason for that is now that we're bringing in another driver. We're bringing in Kimi Antonelli because we want to future-proof our team. And Lewis is now in a season where he is not performing as well as he would expect to be performing. He's not dragging what he would expect to be out of the car and beating his teammate. And we've talked about the reasons for why that might happen, none of which are because he's being sabotaged. But you put all of that together, you put that long line of things, where he expected to be, where he is, and doubts are going to come in, and they're going to be focused either at himself or they're going to be focused at the team, and they have been focused at himself. Listen to this. This is what Lewis said to Mark Hughes at the race at the end of last season. He said, look, there are always going to be moments when you're like, is it me or is it the car? Of course, I'm only human. If anyone in the world tells you don't have those things, they're in denial. We're all human beings. So even he's questioning, is it me? Is it me that's allowing this to happen? That's meaning that I'm not getting the best out of this car. And you put all of that together, and then you're going to get comments like what we heard in Monaco and what we've heard after qualifying in Montreal. It doesn't mean that he's being sabotaged, but you can understand why he's making those comments. That's what I'm trying to say.
I don't think there's anything I would dispute in there. I again think that when you lose, and the way the championship for him was lost, right? Whether it was fair, unfair, I think that marked a downfall, right, of this era of Lewis Hamilton and his dominance, and Mercedes's too, by the way. They both kind of fell off a cliff, really, for the last couple of years, right? And when things like this happen, it's funny. Earlier in the year, we talked about, is Red Bull's short dynastic run coming to an end because of all the internal strife and saga was going on? But ironically, Mercedes has been in that sort of downward swirl for a while. We'll wait and see until these next couple of races, if they're really, really back, or if Montreal was one off. But if they are back, I think this is a fascinating sort of juxtaposition, right, that Lewis Hamilton finds himself with. There's probably a moment there where he might be thinking to himself, well, maybe I should have stuck it out. But I couldn't disagree with anything that you said. I think it's never one thing or two things. It's usually exactly 5 or 6 or 7 things, and then there's maybe 1 or 2 things that sort of put it over, right? Sort of the tipping point, if you will.
Yeah. Ammar, I just want to dig into that quickly because that's my point. Is that we talked about, is Lewis Hamilton encouraging this kind of chat from his own fan base? And I said that a driver doesn't have responsibility for what his fan base subsequently does, and that's what I mean by this, yeah. Right? That he has gone through this. He's in it himself, and the pressure that puts him under, and the doubts that puts in his mind, are understandable. You can understand why he would feel that. and why he would say that, even if it's not true, even if there is no sabotage, and I don't think there is, you can understand why he, with all of that history, would say those things. But his fan base aren't going through that. Then they have to understand, I think, why he would say that, and not immediately say that means that Mercedes is sabotaging him and we're going to go after Mercedes, because that is what created, I think, the toxicity that we're seeing in social media now.
I think in all of this, the one area we haven't quite touched on, which again, we're getting into the psyche of Lewis Hamilton, is these are all the reasons why an F1 driver needs to step away and take a bit of a sabbatical. That's just it. That's the whole reason. It's to give yourself that reset. And as you mentioned, Lewis suggested to Mark Hughes that he was strongly considering that. And I think that could have been a valid path to take. Maybe take a year off after all of that, or a couple of years off, whatever that would be. Look, because this is the pressure that keeps adding on. And Lewis has been in the sport since 2007, right? Now, this is 17 years going straight, right, through so many different eras. I'm not suggesting that he should have done that, but I'm saying these are all, everything that you just highlighted are reasons why an F1 driver needs to sometimes step away and then come back after a year.
I think all of these are reasons. I think these are all reasons why Lewis wouldn't, because what he doesn't
listen,
is have a 14-year.
Yeah.
It's not even, how long is it now? He's
17. 2007.
Yeah, 17 year, right?
Yeah.
A 17-year career. He doesn't want to end it like this.
No, it's not about ending. I said sabbatical. I said take a break and come back.
Yeah,
but okay, but this is
to me is what Mika Hakkinen did, and he never came back.
Fair enough. I mean, that's true, but also this is not going to end in the same way either. I mean, it's not going to look that much different, right? Because again, I maintain in the last few discussions we've had, the competition now is about as high as it's ever been. And it's not just drivers, it's teams, right? We talk about now, and if you look at 25, good God, there are legitimately 5 teams that could be in the mix to win it all. Red Bull are handicapped, Ferrari are in the mix, McLaren are in the mix, Mercedes will be in the mix, you can say, at least by next year. Aston Martin could be in the mix. It's hard to get into. It's hard. It's hard to get into Q1s now, right? I mean, for some of the so
it's a brave person that says Lewis Hamilton isn't able to do that.
No, nobody is saying that. No, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that, again, it's not about him. I mean, look, if anything, the evidence is there right now. He isn't able to do it, right? He isn't able to do it relative to his competitors in this very super tight field. You're seeing that. To your point, he's not even able to beat his teammate. That's not my take, but I've argued with you that the 8-1 qualifying record to me means nothing. So you can't put me in that box, because all those Lewis Hamiltonites will come after me. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is it's not going to be as easy as it was. And maybe some of it is just an athlete's mentality. Like, you can get frustrated by everything. He himself said, you're human. You're being asked questions everywhere you go. At some point, you're going to let certain things out. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, but and that's the point I'm trying to make. But to your point, I think you always have 2 options. You either like double down and try and improve, which is what I think Lewis is saying that he's going to do, what he has done every season.
Well, okay, so I mean, I know we have this,
or you walk away.
Yeah, but you can also walk away and take a little bit of a break. Like, I mean, if you're going to be that great, listen, hang on. Hear me out for a second. If you are as great as his fans believe he is, then you can make it happen. There's no obstacle that cannot be overcome. I mean, you're still in this and trying to win it too, right? Yeah. Nothing fundamentally will change a whole lot. Of course, and I'm not suggesting stepping away for like 2 years or anything, but maybe even 1 year of a sabbatical would have been fine.
To come back where, Ammar? Who's going to bring him back?
Ferrari would have brought him anyway, apparently, right? I mean, it wasn't going to be. And look, I will say this, because we haven't addressed this, and I know we'll have plenty of chances next year. But this that he's walking into at Ferrari, it is not going to be what everyone believes it to be, because that is.
What does everyone believe it to be?
Ferrari is Charles's team. That's what this is, all in all. Lewis Hamilton brings a lot of value, a lot of commercial value, a lot of reach, a lot of positivity, brings all of that. But good God, don't tell me that that's going to translate into him winning that championship just outright. And Leclerc is not going to support that in any way. He is watching his buddy Max en route to a 4th championship. He ain't waiting to give Lewis one, right? He's not going to do that. So good God, I mean, I'm sure Lewis has all the fields joining Ferrari, but I think that welcome is going to fade away really quickly. I'm just saying.
Indeed. Indeed. And on that bombshell, I think it's probably time to call it a day. Ammar, thanks very much. You guys, if you like what we're doing here, if you have any comments, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We read them all and we reply to as many as we possibly can. We will see you guys in the next one.